So I'm going to actually talk about the other side of the story. When we work with client organizations, what is it that we help them discover? What are the barriers that come in the way of this journey? Because that is something which sometimes remains in the subconscious, right? So I want to start with where does our thinking about work come from? Rishabh touched upon it. The photograph you see here is of Frederick Taylor, American mechanical engineer, early 1900s, came up with this theory of scientific management. And very interesting that this theory, 110 years old, and is still very deeply ingrained in most organizations. And when we talk about work, this is what the theory comes in our mind. And what is about this theory that comes to our mind when we talk about work is, Rishabh touched upon it, but it's worthwhile talking about it. There are some people in the organization who do all the thinking, and there are other people in the organization who do all the doing. The thinkers don't do, the doers don't have the ability to think. I may sound brutal, but this is what was a summary of this theory. And of course, this theory was very popular, and it was actually, work was once designed as if people were parts of a machine. So departments, each department specializing in something, doing something. We are all part of one big machine, which is the organization. We will do our bit. And once we do our bit, we are done. And then the machine will run. Taylorism had its merit in those days, right? It was definitely credited for maximizing output. Yeah, but what was the flip side to Taylorism is that it minimized ownership. While people were focused on, being driven or driving others, the ownership aspect was completely missed out. So the whole culture that got created in organizations that followed this, which is almost all organizations, is that we were left with a bunch of people who are ready to take instructions and no one to take initiatives. So what happens to the culture? It is stifling. So 110-year-old theory and still popular, and somewhere in the early 80s came Semler, Ricardo Semler, which is where we are inspired from, what we do. So Ricardo Semler actually challenged all of this. So in the Semco Style Institute, what we do is we help organizations visualize this and help them acknowledge what the barriers are. So what Ricardo Semler did is he turned this theory upside down and actually challenged that popular quote that when I hire a pair of hands, why do I get a brain with it? And he said, yeah, that's natural. You're hiring a human, so you will get a brain with it. And the brain has to be put to use. So he democratized the workplace in his organization. So a small backstory to it is where you will understand the context. So Ricardo Semler inherited his father's manufacturing business in Brazil, manufacturing food processing equipment, not a very glamorous business. And what he did there is he inherited in his early 20s, in the early 80s, and he turned things around. He made a lot of changes in how things work in the organization. He moved away from traditional hierarchical decision making, gave people empowerment to take decisions. Of course, it was not easy. He was challenged. For example, some of his very funny, relatable decisions that he allowed people to take is when the factories had to be painted. He said, why should there be a committee that will decide what should be the color of the walls? Let the people decide. Of course, he was challenged, he was ridiculed, and where people asked him that, what if they decide to paint it black? So that's an interesting thing. A lot of us immediately think about, when we talk of freedom, when we talk of empowerment decision making, we immediately think about what if they take a wrong decision. He actually challenged that, and he said, they are going to work there. What if they take a right decision and make the factory colorful? Which is exactly what happened. So these are interesting, simple anecdotes from Ricardo's journey, which have actually set in motion this new way of working. So we call this journey as the transition from Taylorism to Semlerism. And we're also looking at what are the tangible benefits that Semlerism actually gave. So if you look at Semco group of companies, which was almost on the verge of getting shut down at that time, over a period of 20 years, 2 decades, the company grew at a CAGR of 47%, close to 50%, and attrition remained at 0.02% or some such. So happy people who don't want to leave the organization, and high-performing people who are actually scaling the organization and making it show phenomenal growth. So that's the journey that organizations have seen from Taylorism to Semlerism. Organizations who have adapted it. Now, there are many of us here who in the morning spoke about, I'm curious, I want to know more, I want to understand how this thing happened, I'm a skeptic, all of those. We have a bunch of all those people. So what we're going to talk about now is in our own journey, our own experiences with our client organizations, what were some of the barriers to self-management or democracy at work that we found in our journey? Like, that's an interesting thing because a lot of it remains in our subconscious. There are believers, we want to do it, we absolutely know that we should get there, still something is not working. So our role in this journey is to help you identify those barriers, acknowledge them, and remove them. So please understand, we are not coming in with something new. So it's not that threatening. It's about looking at what is coming in the way of this desire that we have. And let's look at some of them and it'll be eye-opening for you. So controls are designed for machines, but people are not machines, right? So if you look at a typical traditional organization, sometimes the organizational structure itself is a control. This department does this person reports into this position, this is how approvals need to be taken. So when all of this is there, right, okay, and how are jobs described? Through job descriptions, which somebody wrote at some time ago, and a lot of HR people started sharing it, changed the logo, and started reusing. No real thought goes into those documents which are more like carry forwards, correct? And people are stuck with titles. Sometimes even titles don't really reflect or indicate what a person does or what is the person accountable for in the organization. So these are all like labeling parts of machines and also putting controls like you come in at this time, you go in at that time, but people are people. People will have ad hoc needs. People will have things to do. So even organizations where they are very, very open to take on this journey, they want to move, they find themselves stuck behind these rigid controls. And many a time those controls are not with the intent of really controlling, especially I'm talking of the believers. They feel that if we remove those controls, there will be chaos. And like Sidal and Rohit were sharing, actually there won't be chaos. Controls hatake to dekho, right? You will notice that there's a lot more accountability because there's a fundamental human behavior there. People don't want to be identified as a black sheep. None of us like to do that. So if you have unlimited leaves, there won't be anybody who will just take that, unlimited leaves and not work because it will be out there, visible out in the open, right? So if you remove the controls, you will notice that accountability is going way above. So controls are only for machines and not for people because people are not machines. We confuse obedience with efficiency. So this is something which has amused me over several years, not only when I came into this idea of building democratic workplaces, but long back, even in my student days, I used to wonder, students who are not very good academically, they used to be sent to these tuition classes, right? And there were some teachers of mine who used to tell me that very obedient student, no matter how much homework I give, that person does it, write this answer 100 times. And see, from 30%, he started getting 60%. And I used to wonder, is creating an obedient student there? Are we actually creating a student who is loving that subject? What happens to the efficiency? Has he or she really learned something in that subject? It remained a question in my mind and I never understood how these things work. It still remains a question in my mind. It's even getting worse. But in organizations, when we look at good behavior, look at performance appraisals. These are the targets. Okay, have you achieved the targets? You're an obedient individual. You're great. But where do all these individual performances really take the organization outcome to? We don't really measure that. We look at individuals. We look at have they complied. Here is a policy. Here is a leave policy. Have you complied? We are focusing on obedience, and in the process, we are not really looking at efficiency. So this is another thing. So a lot of believers still say that, yes, we want our people to feel at home when they come here to work. We want them to bring their entire self to work. But when you box them under these rules, we're actually probably creating an obedient workforce and not necessarily an efficient workforce. This is one of my favorites. Is fear a manager in your company? In my HR days, I used to be really amused by the performance appraisal system. Not just performance appraisal system, even let's take project reviews. So there used to be some managers who used to come and tell us that I'm very supportive to my team. I give them all the freedom. But in a review meeting, they have to tell me exactly what they have done. And I'll do my review meetings one-on-ones. Right? I'll do it one-on-one because I want to understand and I want to be, I want to tell them where they are going wrong. Right? So every such meeting used to become meetings of fear. Just imagine, I'm out there working on a project, I want to deliver an outcome, and I'm scared to attend that meeting. What outcome am I going to talk about in that meeting? I'm going to go there trying to look good. These were my tasks I was supposed to do. These were the tasks I have accomplished. Fine, I'm out of this room. I don't want to sit in that hot seat for a long time. Where is an opportunity for feedback? Where is an opportunity for me as an individual to seek support? Where is an opportunity for my manager to tell me or guide me if I'm going wrong? Traditional systems do not create that. So even if we come across as good human beings, we are open to our people coming and sharing their personal stories with us, telling us what problems they are facing at home. It's okay to come and leave at any time. But when you're doing a review, you suddenly become a monstrous manager, and fear is the mask that you wear. And this is not about do you believe in it or not. It's all about these ways of working have been ingrained in us. They are in our blood. We are still unconsciously following a 110-year-old way of working. Why? Because the fear is in our own minds at times that, will it work? Will there be chaos if I give too much freedom? And that feeling of wanting to keep the control with ourselves makes a lot of managers and leaders use fear as a manager. So this is another thing that is to be looked at. So when we work with our clients, what we do is we help them identify these fears. So in one client organization, we looked at how is the organization structure becoming a barrier to what they want to do. So they wanted to have a culture of empowered decision making and faster decision making. Right? I'm just giving two of what they wanted their culture to look like. And they were an FMCG business. And so in an FMCG business, right, competition is cutthroat. Right? It's very easy to lose market share to a competitor. And so this business was actually lagging there because they were not able to take faster decisions. So we actually altered their way of working. So when we say alter their way of working or alter their organization structure, what we said is, let's reorganize this group into customer-centric or product-centric groups where they work like a small enterprise. So they have different departments represented in that small group, cross-functional team for want of a better term. And decision making does not have to go through the hierarchy of every function. Decisions get taken by the functional heads when they meet once a month, and then the decisions get tracked down. So we said, let the decision making happen at the edge of the organization where people are really facing the problem, on the ground problem. And within that group, they were empowered to have the ability to take the decision because they had all the contextual information. And of course, we set a lot of things in place so that they have the freedom to take that decision. And these were one of the early benefits that the organization saw in this intervention. So the point I'm making here is the transformation journey itself is so fulfilling that some of these small changes that you make in removing the barriers help you see good results very much in the beginning. So So this process of transformation is not really something where you will see an end result at the end of it. It's an evolving process. So you start noticing small changes, you start seeing positive indicators very early, and then you work through them around the organization. When rituals become mere activities, and this is particularly from an agile context, I was very new to this whole thing about agile. I didn't know. Honestly speaking, when agile was very popular, I was in HR of another organization, an IT services company, and I used to wonder if agile is supposed to be a way of working, why is HR not part of it? And I was asked to shut up saying HR has got nothing to do with it. And I kept my mouth shut and I remained alien to this subject till very recently. But when I started understanding agile, and I spoke to organizations who claim to have practiced agile, and I realized that they were also going through challenges. I was part of one of the agile conferences a couple of years back, and there were a few agile coaches who came and confessed, and they said, we are doing these rituals as mere rituals. The objective behind those rituals are forgotten. And that made me wonder that why is it that's happening that way? And that's another barrier to self-management that we are all missing somewhere. We adopted something which made a lot of sense, but without understanding the essence of why we are doing it. And that's another eye-opener. So when we help our clients to actually do agile in a more meaningful way, this is what we do. We don't have to tell them what rituals to do. We don't have to tell them how to do it. But what is important for us to tell them is why those rituals are in place and why those things are happening, right? So when rituals become mere activities, they become a barrier to self-management. This is another of my favorite. What is the real cost of controls? So controls was always looked at something where you're saving, right? You control expenses, you control activity, you control work that is happening, you control people, and you think you're actually being a savior there. But actually there is a cost that is associated with controls. The cost of controls is lost ownership. People are waiting to take instructions and no one is there to take initiatives. There's a complete loss of ownership, lost ideas. In a controlled atmosphere, new ideas will never come up. People feel frustrated. So lost ideas and of course, lost speed. So when fresh ideas don't come at the spur of the moment, when people do not feel psychologically safe to come up with the ideas, to share their point of view, or to even highlight if something could be going wrong, it could be loss of speed. And if you just add all these losses, you'll be able to visualize what a big loss control, the whole thing about putting control can leave you with. Yeah, so with that, I just want to wrap up. There are definitely stories that we've had with our experiences. We would love to share that the rest of the day. So democracy at work, definitely democracy, it is at work today. We also started with a small sample, and together let's make work awesome.